In winter-time the water at the creek was icy cold, and the Jew who stood there washing sheep's wool felt his fingers grow numb. As he stood thus at his work, the Sultan passed by. "Tell me," the Sultan asked the Jew, "what is more, 5 or 7? "What is more, 12 or 32? Answered the Jew. "Have you ever had a fire in your house?" continued the Sultan. "I've already had 5 fires, but I expect 2 more," replied the Jew. "If I send you one of my pigeons, will you be able to pluck him?" "Just send him to me, and you'll see," answered the Jew. The members of the Sultan's retinue listened to this conversation in amazement, but they said nothing. Suddenly the Sultan asked his vizier, "Did you understand anything of the conversation the Jew and I had?" "How should I know?" answered the vizier. "You spoke in riddles." "Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" cried the Sultan angrily. "You are the vizier, supposedly the wisest man in the land, and yet a simple Jew understood me and you didn't. I give you 3 days' time to give me the right answer. If you fail to do so, I'll fire you from your office." The vizier was stunned. He hastened home and called together all his sages and counselors, but not one of them could tell him the meaning of the Sultan's questions to the Jew. Thereupon the vizier summoned the Jew to the palace. "Tell me, what was the meaning of the questions the Sultan put to you?" he asked him. "I'll tell you if you'll give me 1,000 dinars," the Jew replied. "What insolence!" shouted the vizier angrily. "Do you expect me to pay you 1,000 dinars for explaining to me the meaning of a few wretched words?" "If it's not worth the money, don't pay," retorted the Jew, and went home. But when the morning of the 3rd day arrived, the vizier sent hurriedly for the Jew. "Quick! Here are the 1,000 dinars. Explain the questions," he cried. Having pocketed the money, the Jew gave the vizier the following explanation. "When the Sultan saw me washing wool in the icy stream, he asked me whether 7 was not more than 5. He meant to ask me whether I did not earn enough during the 7 warm months to make unnecessary my work during the 5 cold months. I answered that 32 was more than 12. By that I meant that with my 32 teeth I could eat up more than I could earn in all 12 months. The Sultan further asked me whether I ever had a fire in my house. He merely wished to know whether I had married off any of my children. For when you get through marrying one off, you emerge from the whole business as destitute as from a fire. So I answered that I already had 5 fires, and there were still 2 to come. Lastly, the Sultan asked me whether, if he'd send me one of his pigeons, would I be able to pluck him. To this I answered, just send him to me, and you'll see. As you see, he sent you to me. So you now go and inform the Sultan whether I've done so or not." Once there was a nobleman, and he had 3 Jewish tenants on his estate. One held the forest concession, another operated the mill, the third, the poorest of them, ran the inn. One day the nobleman summoned the 3 and said to them, "I am going to put to you 3 questions. Which is the swiftest thing in the world? Which is the fattest? Which is the dearest? The one who answers correctly all of these questions won't have to pay me any rent for 10 years, and whoever fails to give me the correct answer, I'll send packing from my estate." The Jew who had the forest concession and the one who operated the mill did not think very long, and decided between them to give the following answers. The swiftest thing in the world is the nobleman's horse, the fattest is the nobleman's pig, and the dearest is the nobleman's wife. The poor innkeeper, however, went home feeling very much worried. He had only 3 days' time to answer the nobleman's questions. He racked his brains. What answers could he give? Now the innkeeper had a daughter. She was pretty and clever. "What is worrying you so, father?" she asked. He told her about the nobleman's 3 questions. "Why shouldn't I worry?" he cried. "I've thought and thought, but I cannot find the answers." "There is nothing to worry about, father," she told him. "The questions are very easy. The swiftest thing in the world is thought. The fattest is the earth. dearest is sleep. When the 3 days were up, the 3 Jewish tenants went to see the landowner. Pridefully, the first 2 gave the answers they had agreed upon beforehand, thinking that the landowner would feel flattered by them. "You're wrong," cried the nobleman. "Now pack up and leave my estate right away, and don't you dare to come back." But when he heard the innkeeper's answers, he was filled with wonder. "I like your answers very much," he told him. "But I know you didn't think them up by yourself. Confess, who gave you the answers?" "It was my daughter," the innkeeper answered. "Your daughter?" exclaimed the nobleman in surprise. "Since she is so clever, I'd very much like to see her. Bring her to me in 3 days' time, but listen carefully. She must come here neither walking nor riding, neither dressed nor naked. She must also bring me a gift that is not a gift." The innkeeper returned home even more worried than the first time. "What now, father?" his daughter asked him. "What's worrying you?" He then told her of the nobleman's request to see her, and of his instructions. "What is there to worry about?" she said. "Go to the marketplace and buy me a fishing net, also a goat, a couple of pigeons, and several pounds of meat." He did as she told him, and brought to her his purchases. At the appointed time she undressed and wound herself in the fishing net, so she was neither dressed nor naked. She then mounted the goat, her feet dragging on the ground, so that she was neither riding nor walking. Then she took the 2 pigeons in one hand and the meat in the other. In this way she arrived at the nobleman's house. The nobleman stood at the window watching her arrival. As soon as he saw her, he turned his dogs on her, and, as they tried to attack her, she threw them the meat. So they pounced on the meat and let her pass into the house. "I've brought you a gift that is not a gift," she said to the nobleman, stretching out her hand holding the 2 pigeons. But suddenly she released the birds and they flew out the window. The nobleman was enchanted with her. "What a very clever girl you are," he cried. "I want to marry you, but only on one condition. Never must you interfere in my affairs." She gave him her promise, and he made her his wife. One day, as she stood at the window, she saw a weeping peasant pass by. "Why do you weep?" she asked him. "My neighbor and I own a stable in partnership," he told her. "He keeps a wagon there, and I a mare. Last night the mare gave birth to a pony under my neighbor's wagon, whereupon my neighbor insisted that the pony rightfully belonged to him. So I haled him before the nobleman, who upheld him and said the pony was his. How unjust, I say!" "Take my advice," the nobleman's wife said. "Get a fishing rod and station yourself before my husband's window. Nearby you'll find a sand heap. Pretend you're catching fish there. My husband will surely be amazed and will ask you, 'How can you catch fish in a sand heap?' So you will answer him, 'If a wagon can give birth to a pony, then I can catch fish in a sand heap.'" The peasant did as she told him, and it happened exactly as she said it would. When the nobleman heard the peasant's answer, he said to him, "You didn't think this up out of your own head. Confess, who told you?" "It was your wife." Angrily, the nobleman went to look for his wife. "You have broken your promise not to interfere in my affairs," he stormed at her. "Go and choose from all my possessions that which you deem the most precious, and return to your father's house." "Very well," she answered, "I will go. But before I do, I would like to dine with you for one last time." He consented, and during dinner she plied him with much wine. When he had drunk a great deal, he became drowsy and fell asleep. Thereupon she ordered that his carriage be made ready. She then drove him, as he slept, to her father's house. When he sobered up and discovered where he was, he asked in surprise, "How did I get here?" "It was I who brought you," his wife confessed. "Don't you remember telling me to choose the most precious possession you owned, and then to return to my father's house? So I looked over all your possessions, and, not finding any of them as precious as you, I carried you away with me to my father's house." The nobleman was overjoyed. "Since you love me so, let's go home," he said. So they were reconciled and lived in prosperity and in honor for the rest of their lives. A merchant from Jerusalem traveled on business to a distant city. While there, he fell sick, and before long found himself at the point of death. Thereupon he called the man in whose house he lodged, and entrusted him with all his possessions, both merchandise and money. He then said to him, "A young man will soon be coming to you from Jerusalem. You will know him by 3 clever things he will do. He is my son, and you must give him all my possessions." All this time the dying man's son waited impatiently for the return of his father. Worried by his prolonged absence, he decided that his father must have met with a misfortune. He therefore journeyed to that distant city in search of him. He knew the name of the man in whose house his father lodged, and so, as soon as he arrived, he went to look for him. Now, the townsfolk had agreed amongst themselves that should a stranger arrive and ask for this man, no one should divulge where he lived. They did as they had agreed, and the poor orphan was very much puzzled. He finally fell upon a stratagem. He called out to a woodcutter carrying a load of wood, "I would like to buy your wood." And after they had agreed upon a price, and he had paid for it, the orphan mentioned the name of the man for whom he was looking, and asked the woodcutter to deliver it to him. The woodcutter walked ahead carrying his load, and behind him followed the orphan. When they reached their destination, the woodcutter cried out within the gate, calling the man by his name, "Come and get your wood." "Wood? What wood? I never ordered any wood from you." "Maybe you didn't," replied the woodcutter, "but this young man here did. He paid for it, and he asked me to deliver it to you." Surprised but grateful, the man said to the youth, "Peace be to you," and he invited him into his house. "Who are you?" asked the man. "I am the son of the man who lodges in your house and who has failed to return home." The man entertained him graciously, and in his honor ordered a feast prepared. When they sat down at the table, the servants placed before them 5 roasted pigeons. The host, wishing to show his guest honor, said to him, "Be good enough to serve." But the young man declined the honor, saying, "No, thank you. You are the host, and the honor belongs to you." However, when his host insisted, the young man agreed and began to serve. 1 pigeon he gave to his host and his wife. Another he gave to the man's 2 sons, and another to his 2 daughters. For himself he kept 2 pigeons. His host was astonished by his action, but did not say a word. For the evening meal they had a stuffed chicken. Again the host very politely asked his guest to serve. The young man agreed. He gave the head of the fowl to the host, the gizzard, heart, and liver to the hostess, the legs to the sons, and the wings to the daughters. For himself he kept the body. Out of patience with his guest's conduct, the host said to him, "Is this the way you serve in Jerusalem?" "Did I not decline the honor when you tried to force it on me?" answered the youth. "However, I will explain to you what I did, and then you'll see that I acted correctly. At noon today I had to serve the 5 roasted pigeons. I gave you and your wife 1, and so, together with the pigeon, you numbered 3. Your sons and a pigeon, also your 2 daughters and their pigeon, each numbered 3. And so, to keep the number just and equal, I had to take the 2 remaining pigeons for myself. With regard to the chicken, because you are the head of the household, I gave you the head. I gave the insides to your wife, because from within her came forth your children. Because your sons are the pillars of your household, I gave them the legs. As for your daughters, I gave them the wings, because in God's own time they will fly away from you with husbands. For myself I've kept the body, which, as you see, has the shape of a boat, for tomorrow I'm sailing home." "The Lord be praised," exclaimed his host, overjoyed. "You are truly the son of your father, for I know you by the 3 clever things you have done. The first with the wood, the second with the roasted pigeons, and the third with the hen." Then he returned to the young man his father's fortune. Once there was a king who was wise and mighty. He had a large harem of many wives and concubines. One night he had a troubling dream. He saw an ape out of the land of Yemen, sitting astride the necks of his wives and concubines, and then leaping from one to another. In the morning the king awoke feeling sad and depressed. He thought to himself gloomily, "The dream can mean nothing else. but that the king of Yemen will conquer my country and will take my wives away from me." When the chamberlain entered, as was his daily custom, he heard his master sighing. "What makes you so sad, O king?" he asked. "Reveal your secret to your servant. Maybe I will be able to help you in your trouble." The king told him, "I had a dream last night that made me have bitter forebodings of death. Do you know of any man who can interpret dreams well?" "I have heard that only 3 days' journey from here lives a man of great wisdom who can interpret the most confusing dreams. Tell me what troubles you, O king, and I will go to ask the help of this interpreter of dreams." The king told him his dream, and then said to the chamberlain, "Go now in peace." And so the chamberlain mounted his mule and started out in search of the wise man. On the following morning he met a farmer riding on an ass. "Peace be with you, tiller of the soil," he said, "you who are of earth and who eat earth." The farmer laughed, hearing him speak so. "Where are you traveling?" asked the chamberlain. "I'm on my way home." "Will you carry me, or shall I carry you?" asked the chamberlain. The farmer laughed again, saying, "Why should I carry you when you are riding on a mule and I am mounted on an ass?" Then they rode on together for a while. Soon they came to a field covered with ripening wheat. "See how beautiful the field looks and how full the wheat spears are," said the farmer. "Indeed it's so," answered the chamberlain, "but the wheat has already been eaten." They rode on and came upon a tower built upon a high cliff. "See how strong this fortress is," cried the farmer with admiration. "It looks well fortified, but it may be destroyed from within," replied the chamberlain. "Further on," he exclaimed, "just look at the snow on the summit." Again the farmer laughed, because it was in the middle of summer, and there was no sign of snow anywhere. Soon they approached a city, and saw a dead man being borne on his bier to the cemetery. "Is this one dead or alive?" asked the chamberlain. At this the farmer thought to himself, "This man thinks he's clever, but he's the most stupid man I've ever met." When the sun began to set, the chamberlain asked his companion, "Is there an inn in the neighborhood?" The farmer replied, "Ahead of us is the village where I live. Bestow on me the honor of lodging with me. I have enough straw for your bed and fodder for your mule." "I will gladly accept your hospitality," said the chamberlain. Thus he accompanied the farmer to his house. The farmer served him food and drink, fed his mule, and showed him the place where he could lie. The farmer then went to sleep beside his wife. His 2 daughters also slept in the same room. At night the farmer woke his wife and daughters and said to them, "What a simpleton is our guest!" And he repeated all the remarkable things the chamberlain had said during their journey. Now the farmer's youngest daughter was very clever. She said to her father, "Why do you call this man a fool? In my opinion, he is very clever and wise. What he said is full of deep meaning and of great significance. I don't think you understood what he meant." And then she went on to explain. When he said that he who cultivates the soil also eats earth, he referred to the origin of all food, which springs from the earth. When he told you that you were of the earth, too, he was referring to the scriptural passage, "From dust you spring, and to dust you shall return." When he asked the question, "Which one of you shall carry the other?" he was merely asking which one of you should entertain the other, for he who lightens the spirit of a fellow traveler also lightens his journey, so that he feels as if he were being carried. When he spoke of the wheat growing in the field, he could very well have been right, for if the owner of the field was poor and in debt, he most likely had already sold the crop in advance. When he held that the tower was not strongly fortified, he merely pointed to the possibilities of traders being within its walls, and of there being an insufficient stock of food and water inside. When he said that there was snow on the mountain, he was merely referring to your gray hair and beard. You should have answered, "Time has done that to me." When he asked whether the dead man was dead or alive, he merely wished to inquire whether he left children behind, and if he did, he was alive, even though dead. The farmer was under the impression that the chamberlain was fast asleep, but in fact he was very much awake, and had eagerly followed the daughter in her explanation. When the morning came, the daughter said to her father, "I want you to give our guest, before he leaves us, whatever food I'll give you." So she placed before her father 30 eggs, a bowl of milk, and a whole loaf. "Now go to our guest and ask him how many days are still required to complete the month, whether the moon is full and the sun is whole." Of the food that his daughter had served him, the farmer ate only 2 eggs and a slice of bread, and also drank a little milk. The rest he placed before the chamberlain. Then he put to him the questions his daughter had instructed him to ask. The chamberlain listened and then replied, "Tell your daughter that 2 days are missing to complete the month, and that neither the sun nor the moon are full." The farmer went to his daughter and reported to her what the chamberlain had answered. "Tell me, truly, isn't the man a simpleton?" he asked. "We are right in the middle of the month, and here he claims that it is only 2 days before its end." "Tell me, father," asked the daughter, "did you taste any of the food I gave you?" "I ate 2 eggs, a slice of bread, and I drank a little milk," answered her father. "Now I know that the stranger is a wise man," cried the daughter. When the chamberlain heard of the cleverness of the girl, he was filled with astonishment. "Let me speak with your daughter," he asked the farmer. The farmer consented, and the girl was introduced to the chamberlain. He asked her some more questions, and she knew the right answers. Having convinced himself of her wisdom, he told her the reason for his journey and gave her all the details of the king's dream. When he had finished, the girl said, "I know well what the ape that the king saw in his dream signifies, but I will not confide it to anyone but the king himself." The chamberlain now revealed his true identity to the farmer and his wife, and begged them to allow their daughter to journey with him to the palace of the king. Her parents gave their consent, so the chamberlain brought the farmer's daughter before the king, and she found favor in the king's eyes. He led her into a private chamber, where he repeated to her his dream, and after he had spoken, she said, "O king, banish all worry from your mind. The ape you saw had no evil significance, but I dare not tell you the meaning of the dream in order not to cause you suffering." "I command you to speak," cried the king sternly. "Very well, then," the girl answered. "Make a thorough search of your harem, and among your wives and your concubines and their maidservants you will find hidden an evil man who is disguised in woman's attire. He is the ape you saw in your dream." So the king commanded that the matter be investigated, and it was as the farmer's daughter had said. They found a youth among them masquerading in woman's clothes. To teach his wives and concubines a lesson, the king ordered that the man be cut down before their eyes, and his blood be sprinkled on their faces. He also ordered killed all the women who had sinned with him. And when all this was done, he made the farmer's daughter his wife, and placed the royal crown on her head. He swore to give up all of his wives and concubines, and the clever girl remained his only mate. The proverb runs, "You will be left behind as Kunz was left behind to look after the sheep." And if you ask how Kunz came to be left behind to look after the sheep, I will tell you. Once upon a time there was a mighty king, who had a counselor called Kunz. Whenever the king needed advice and the counselors in conference came to a decision, the clever Kunz would go to the king and say, "This is our decision." This fine gentleman always took the credit to himself, pretending that he was responsible for the advice and that the other counselors had to agree with him, for they had neither sense nor understanding. And the good king believed what Kunz told him, and considered him as much wiser than the other counselors. Now the other counselors noticed that the king loved Kunz more than he loved them, and they resented it very much, for he was the least important among them. One day they took counsel together how to get the better of Kunz and humiliate him. So they went to the king and said, "Lord King, we beg of you to forgive us, for we wish to ask you how it is that you think more of Kunz and hold him in higher esteem than the rest of us, although we know that he is the least important among us." The king replied, "I will tell you how it happens. Whenever you come to a decision on any matter, he reports it to me and says that the idea is his, and that you have to acknowledge every time that he is wiser than you, and that you have no sense at all. But I do not hold you in disrespect, for you are all good to me." When the counselors heard this, they were very glad and thought, "We will soon bring about his downfall." Then they said to the king, "Be assured that all which Kunz said is a lie, for he has no sense at all. Try every one of us separately, and you will see that he cannot give you any advice by himself." The king said, "I will find out very soon," and sent for his beloved counselor Kunz, and said to him, "My dear servant, I know that you are loyal and exceedingly wise. Now I have something in my mind that I do not wish to reveal to anyone. Therefore, I want to ask you whether you can find out the truth for me, and if you do, I will reward you liberally." The clever Kunz replied, "My beloved king, ask me, and I hope I can give you an answer. Tell me your secret." The king said, "I will ask you 3 questions. The first is, where does the sun rise? The second is, how far is the sky from the earth? The third, my dear Kunz, is, what am I thinking?" When Kunz heard these 3 questions, he said, "Lord King, these are difficult matters which cannot be answered offhand. They require time. I beg of you, therefore, to give me 3 days' time, and then I hope to give you the proper answer." The king replied, "My dear Kunz, your request is granted. I will give you 3 days." Kunz went away and thought to himself, "I cannot concentrate my mind very well in the city. I will go for a walk into the country. There I am alone and can reflect better than in the city." He went out into the country and came upon the shepherd who was tending his flock. Walking along, he talked as if it were to himself, saying, "Who can tell me how far the heavens are from the earth? Who can tell me where the sun rises? Who can tell me what the king is thinking?" The shepherd, seeing his master walking about wrapped in thought, said to him, "Sir, pardon me. I see that you are greatly troubled in your mind. If you ask me, I might be able to help you. As the proverb says, one can often advise another, though one cannot advise oneself." When Kunz heard these words from the shepherd, he thought, "I will tell him. Perhaps after all he may be able to advise me." And he said, "I will tell you why I am so troubled. The king asked me 3 questions, which I must answer or lose my neck. I have been thinking about them and cannot find the answer." Then the shepherd said, "What are the 3 questions? Perhaps I may be able to help you in your great trouble." So Kunz thought, "I will tell him. Maybe he is a scholar." And he said, "My dear shepherd, these are the 3 questions which the king asked me. I must tell him where the sun rises, how far the heavens are from the earth, and what the king is thinking." The shepherd thought it was well to know the answers, and said to Kunz, "My dear master, give me your fine clothes, and you put on my poor garments, and look after the sheep. I will go to the king, and he will think that I am you, and will ask me the 3 questions. Then I shall give him the proper answers, and you will be saved from your trouble. Then I shall return here, and you will not be in disgrace with your king." Kunz allowed himself to be persuaded, gave the shepherd his good clothes and fine cloak, while he put on the shepherd's rough garments and sat down to look after the sheep, as though he had done it all his life. When the 3 days had passed, the shepherd went to the king and said, "Lord King, I have been thinking over the 3 questions that you asked me." The king said, "Now tell me, where does the sun rise?" The shepherd replied, "The sun rises in the east and sets in the west." The king asked again, "How far are the heavens from the earth?" The shepherd replied, "As far as the earth is from the heavens." Then the king said, "What am I thinking?" The shepherd replied, "My lord king, you are thinking that I am your counselor Kunz, but I am not. I am the shepherd who looks after his flock. My master Kunz was walking in the field one day and saying to himself, 'Who can tell me where the sun rises? Who can tell me how far the heavens are from the earth? Who can tell me what the king has in his mind?' He was walking about all the time and talking in such fashion. So I told him he should give me his good clothes, and I would give him my rough clothes. He should look after the sheep, and I would, with the help of God, guess the answers to these 3 questions and save him. He allowed himself to be persuaded, and so he is now out in the field, dressed in my rough clothes and tending the sheep, while I am dressed in his beautiful cloak and his best clothes." When the king heard this, he said to the shepherd, "As you succeeded in persuading Kunz, you shall remain my counselor, and Kunz can look after the sheep." Hence the proverb, "You will be left behind as Kunz was left behind to look after the sheep." This is what happened to him. May it go better with us.